Thank you all for sharing. Um, yeah. With that, we wanted to welcome you all to this teach-in that we're holding today. So we're going to be talking today about Black and Filipino solidarity and like why the futures of our peoples are so interconnected. And for folks who want to see, we also are talking about information. A lot of it came from this book, Black Lives and Brown Freedom by Kirby Arroyo. It really lays the foundation for what we're talking about today when we're talking about historic parallels between the two peoples and, the fights that they wage under the heel of imperialism and oppression. So I think before we get started, do we want to introduce ourselves? Folks want to, or we can start this way and come this way?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Eleanor. I'm an organizer with Bayan DMV, which is a collection of national democratic mass organizations struggling for a true, free, and democratic Philippines.
Right on. Come on, give it up. My name is Marawi, he, him. I'm with the DC Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression and DC Against the Trump Agenda.
Yeah, and again, for folks, my name is Rob, and I'm an organizer with the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines. So we are a solidarity formation of both Filipinos and non-Filipinos who, stand in solidarity with, the Filipino people and their struggle to have a truly free and democratic Philippines.
Right on. Should we go right into it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
All right. So, we're going to talk about, broader context for, why this discussion is important. We're going to talk about a wide historical gamut to kind of lay down the foundation for where we are today and why it's so important for us to unite and fight back. As we said before at other teach-ins, we're not just here to study, we're here to fight. We're here to fight and win. And liberate, ourselves and our people, through the course of that. And so we have been doing a lot of fighting, over the last, years, but certainly over the last 6 months, since Trump has, kind of tried to federalize the city, the police force and all that kind of stuff. And we've learned a lot, and we've strengthened a lot of our ways of, fighting together, our solidarity. And so we want to, take this moment, this brief respite here tonight to kind of further our understanding so that we can take it back out into the streets and fight some more. Ain't that right? Yeah. Right on. So we talked about self-determination, and I think we'll start off. We want to talk about what that means from a context around Black people and what that means, for Filipinos as well. I'll come back to this photo when I speak, but I'll let Corey go first.
Absolutely. So from a national democratic perspective, a Philippines that is ruled by self-determination is a Philippines that is free from both foreign and local, free from the oppression of foreign and local ruling classes. That includes genuine land reform, so breaking up haciendas and plantations that exist in the Philippines, as well as national industrialization of all of the natural resources in the Philippines, and a government formed by the masses, not by the 1% to 3% of national bourgeois and big compradors.
Right on. And, here in the United States, we talk about self-determination a lot as well. It's a demand that came out of Black people's historic struggle for liberation, all the way back since before slavery, you know what I mean? Black people were fighting and recognized themselves, in many different ways, as a distinct nation within the United States, and the process of enslavement, the process of, capitalist exploitation and, everything that Black people went through, during slavery, kind of congealed this question in a very concrete way here in the United States. And so, what we have, if you look at the southern, portion of the United States, from eastern Texas all the way up through, Virginia, the Carolinas, Virginia, and, DC even is kind of on the tip end of this, what we call the Black Belt South, which is where the majority of Black people were concentrated during slavery. and actually still exists to this day. The majority of black people still, remain in those, in that region of essentially contiguous, back-to-back counties of majority black populations, and they cut through these states. If you look at these political, fights that are happening in Alabama and this and that, where they're gerrymandering all these different areas, what they're doing is cutting in, bits, sections of the Black Belt South and scooping it into wider parts of that state, all across, that whole region to kind of break up the political power, that's concentrated right there. So when we talk about self-determination, we're talking about it, for the Black Belt South, what we call the Black Nation. And, black people experience, oppression not on the basis of just being, individuals here in this country, who are black. They experience oppression on the basis of being members of an oppressed nation. If you take, for example, Filipinos experience oppression on the basis of, being members, or citizens or, people of this oppressed nation. Nigerians, for example, go around the world and experience oppression on the basis of coming from an oppressed nation. Americans go around, or many white Americans go around and don't, on the basis that they come from a strong nation, or the oppressing nation. But the question of the Black Belt South, it's just as if you took Nigeria and put it here in the belly of the United States. That's what we're talking about, an actual concrete nation. We'll leave it at that and go on to the next piece.
Yeah, so before we get into kind of the bulk of our teach-in today, which is the Philippine-American War, we wanted to take a second to remind us all of where we are in history at this time. So the Philippine-American War started in 1898. So American imperialism. 1898 is also the year of the Spanish-American War, where the United States, quote-unquote, bought the Philippines from Spain, which is not the case. So these are some political cartoons from the time of American imperialism. I think one that's really striking is the one behind me of Uncle Sam using the Philippines as a stepping stone to China, which means that they've been saying the quiet part out loud since the beginning.
And you can see he's carrying things like education, religion, bridges, steel, rails, modernization, essentially, civilization. And he's stepping right there on the Philippines and on his way to China. But you'll see a lot of that in a lot of this propaganda.
And then in the Philippines, 1898 is the end of the 333 years of Spanish colonization of the Philippines. The Philippine Revolution was between 1896 and 1898, led by Andres Bonifacio and the Katipunan. You can see the flag of the KKK. The KKK in the Philippines is the exact opposite of the KKK in the United States. Instead of fighting for, oppressing people, it was fighting for the liberation and social justice of the Filipino people. And so when we learn, that the U.S. bought the Philippines, and that's how they were able to extend their imperialism in the Pacific, it was actually taking an independent Philippine nation and colonizing them rather than buying land from another imperial power.
Give it up for the good KKK, y'all.
Yeah, so like in Tagalog, it's like it was an acronym that they were using to describe themselves as like the most supreme brotherhood of the sons and daughters of the nation, or the kataas-taasang kagalagalang katipunan na mag-aanak ng bayan. So long thing, but we usually just call them the Katipunan, so we don't have to call them the KKK.
That's very lit. I actually love that history as a counter history, you know what I mean? I would love to tell it, you know what I'm saying? I would love for some actual KKKs here in the United States to learn that, and know that, like, so anyway, setting the stage, the end of Reconstruction. So as you all know, here in the United States in 1965, we had the Civil War, between the slaveholders in the South and the Union, industrial capitalists in the North. And at the end, and the Union Army was transformed into a revolutionary force through the participation of 200,000 black men and women who rose up, from slavery and joined in the war effort, and helped to defeat the South. They were decisive in that process. That brought about Reconstruction, which was one of the most revolutionary moments here in U.S. history, where on all fronts, black people were leading the political struggle to basically fight for all democratic fronts, on all democratic fronts, for democratic rights, equality, including, we can thank them, that whole struggle, for example, for things like, public school, which was one of the first things that they were making demands on, and around 2,000 black people took political office through the 12 years of Reconstruction, and all the way up into the Senate. Here you have photo. This is the first vote. There was suffrage. Black men had the right to vote, they were doing incredible things all over the South. And of course, this was only possible because the slaveocracy, the South, the powers in the South were held at gunpoint. They were repressed at gunpoint, by the U.S. government, which, with black people participating in this, kind of troops on the ground in the South, and were basically helping them to repress these vicious, forces of reaction here, in the United States, these racist, slave aspiring, kind of, this class. And one of the things that they were doing was repressing the KKK, nearly out of existence. They were passing laws that were making it, illegal, to do the things that they were doing. Now, the northern, the North made in the Hayes-Tilden Act, the North made a deal with the South in order to, hold on to the presidency, that they would remove the troops from the South. And in so doing, they sold out black people and brought about, the very bloody end of Reconstruction. It was drowned in blood, as we say. It created an upsurge of KKK, racist, white league, just racist, Jim Crow terror. The surge of Jim Crow laws and policies throughout the country. So you see here, this image right here is seen in Memphis, Tennessee, during a riot in which a freedmen's schoolhouse was burned by, a crowd of crackers. Now, right here, you kind of see this is kind of showing, how, it was through the South's participation, re-participation in government that these things became possible, now here's an image of basically, you can see here in these carts, there's black men who are being held to be forced into the new form of slavery, which was, these chain gangs that popped up immediately, after the Civil War, as they were finding, searching for new ways to capitalize on black people. And you see that they're here under armed guard, dogs, and all that kind of stuff. Just kind of give you an example of like what came after that. So now we also around that time in the late, Reconstruction ended what 76, 77, 1877. But around that time, the United States was constantly expanding westward, from the 20s, 30s, 40s, they were, acquiring whole swaths of land, as they were pushing west. And they, essentially created these units, after the Civil War. All these black people who had participated in the Union Army were formed then into, these all black regiments that became known as the Buffalo Soldiers. And this is an important kind of segue back into, this discussion around U.S. imperialism in the Philippines. So you can kind of see here, these Buffalo Soldiers who were, highly trained, highly disciplined, fighters that were used to, guard and, propel the westward expansion, guarding railways, killing, going to war with Native Americans, killing, indigenous people, forced into, not forced, well, in many ways they going into, the military was a way out, or in their minds, a upward mobility path in the United States, which, segregation made any other path, highly, vicious, painful, and undesirable, so they were here used to kill oppressed people being used to kill indigenous people and other oppressed people. So that's a pattern that we'll see.
Yeah, and then one quick last thing before we get fully to the Philippine-American War was in the 1880s was the Chinese Exclusion Act, which basically banned Chinese people from immigrating to the United States, but this also set the precedent for quotas of how many people from other nations can immigrate into the U.S. So the U.S. didn't want Filipinos to be in their country, but they were totally fine to go to the Philippines. So, yeah.
Yeah. So to bring it back a little bit, I'm not going to get into sort of the nitty gritty history of like dates and battles about the Philippine-American War, but to kind of give like a broad overview of what exactly happened during the Philippine-American War. In 1896, like Eleanor was talking about, was the start of the Philippine Revolution against Spain, right? Magellan arrived to the Philippines in 1521, and they were colonized for over 300 years of brutal oppression from the Spanish, right? So it started in 1896 that the Katipunan and other revolutionary forces started to wage what was a struggle, an armed struggle for self-determination and liberation of their homeland. And what's impressive about it is, like, at the start of the Spanish-American War, which started in 1898, they had almost completely freed their country, right? In a lot of our history textbooks that we learn about, the U.S. kind of parachuted in, allied with the Filipinos and helped them win their freedom against Spain. But Spain was completely and utterly thrashed by the Filipinos, right? Part of it was because Spanish colonization of the Philippines, numbers-wise, was not as big as it was in Latin America, so they had a smaller presence. But yeah, the Filipinos were able to free themselves, right? So when we're going back to the start of the Spanish-American War, the U.S. went to war with Spain. Mainly, the way they advertised it to the public was to free, sound familiar, to free the people of Cuba. They wanted to free the people of Cuba from the tyrannical Spanish, right? Because the U.S. is such like an exporter of freedom to all these other countries. But in winning that war, that war only lasted a few months, right? The U.S., they called it a splendid little war, where they thrashed the Spanish, which, to be fair, they did beat the Spanish in that war. The Spanish were a declining empire at the time, and they really couldn't keep up with U.S. manufacturing and military technology and just sheer numbers. But at the end of the Spanish-American War, they signed the Treaty of Paris, which for, I think it was $20 million US, the U.S. acquired Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines as new colonial possessions, right? So the Philippine-American War starts soon after because the Filipinos were under the impression that they would be free, right? That was what was the outcome of the revolutionary struggle. It wasn't to trade one colonizer for another. It was to have a free nation. So there were two notable phases in the Philippine-American War. So we talk about this first phase from 1889. That was the Revolutionary Army that was fighting to create a Republic of the Philippines based in the north. A lot of the soldiers came from Cavite and like other surrounding provinces. And so when we say 1899 to 1902, that's formal fighting ended in 1902. But there were still holdout units that never surrendered and eventually surrendered a couple years later. And then for context in the next couple of slides, when we talk about U.S. atrocities in the Philippines, we had what was called the Moro Rebellion. So if you look at a map of the Philippines, the southern island is called Mindanao, right? A very large island. And this island was never fully colonized by the Spanish because they were so politically and economically advanced and militarily advanced, they never fully surrendered to the Spanish. And then the U.S. came in, assuming that by acquiring the Philippines, they acquired the whole thing. Well, the Moro people did not lay down arms, and they waged their own struggle to remain independent. An important context for that is that since they were never colonized by the Spanish, they never became majority Catholic like the rest of the Philippines, so they remained Muslim, like a lot of Southeast Asia. So there's like a lot of parallels to the way that the U.S. Oppresses Muslim people also. Have you ever heard the quote where like Trump quoted stories from the Philippine-American War talking about when you're fighting Muslim people, you should dip the bullets in pork fat and then shoot them with it? That came from this. That was what they did to the Muslim people of Mindanao.
Yeah, just a quick content warning while we're debunking how the U.S. freed the Philippines. The next couple of slides are going to have some graphic images, so if you want to look away, now's your warning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think by the end of the wars, it's hard to get concrete estimates, but the lower end estimates was 200,000 dead Filipinos, and the upper limits somewhere around 1 million if you're including everyone who died from disease and starvation.
Yeah, so the U.S. military was absolutely destructive for the Philippines during the Philippine-American War. As Rob said, estimates of 1 million Filipinos died. This picture on the left is from literally the first day of the war. And the cartoon on the right has a quote from General Smith saying, "Kill everyone over 10. And the bottom caption says, "Criminals because they were born 10 years before we took the Philippines." There are some people who consider the Philippine-American War and the atrocities committed by the U.S. in the Philippines a genocide. So this photo is the result of the Badajoz massacre, which took place on the island of Mindanao. About 900 to 1,000 of the indigenous people took shelter in a crater of Badajoz, which means Mount Dajo, and they took refuge there while American troops were surrounding them. Basically, the commander of the army said, "Kill or take every single one of them as a prisoner of war," and they unfortunately succeeded in that. Of the 1,000 people who were in that crater, 6 of them were remaining alive, but they were taken as prisoners of war by the U.S. In addition to, obviously, the brutal killing, the starvation, the disease, as with any conflict around the world in history, there was also conflict-related sexual violence against women as well, and a very brutal fate for them.
Yeah, so we're going past this dark period in the history, but also like this is sort of in the Filipinos fighting their struggle for national liberation. There was already solidarity being expressed, and chiefly among like Black Americans at the time. So we have a quote here from Ida B. Wells, and she was speaking at a conference in D.C., and as one of the founding civil rights leaders in this country was already speaking against U.S. expansionism, and not just limited to the Philippines, but all these other territories that they acquired. Domestically in the U.S., there were different like Black chapters of the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, that were already condemning imperialism and putting out statements in newspapers. And they did it so often that anti-imperialism became a mainstream talking point. Like presidential candidates were running saying that I am an anti-imperialist, right? So, where did this kind of fervor go away, right? Because now the U.S. really benefits from imperialism. You'd never hear that. But, it was credit to Black people in America to really push that talking point to say that no, we should not become an imperialist nation. And at the time, there was also a formation called the Anti-Imperialist League, which was made up of black people and white people. A lot of them were veterans of the abolitionist movement that really like took political action to condemn the annexation of the Philippines as a colony. And here at the bottom, you know, we talked about Buffalo Soldiers, right? Black soldiers who were serving in the United States Army at the time. A lot of them suffered mistreatment within the U.S. Army. They were not allowed to serve as officers. They had to serve under white officers. And because of this, during the Philippine-American War, I think up to 20 Buffalo Soldiers actually defected and joined the Philippine Revolutionary Army. One of the more notable people that we know is David Fagan, who's pictured here on your lower right-hand corner. Sir, oh, yeah, I got it. Yeah, okay. What was a corporal in the U.S. Army, right? Which is a very, if folks don't know military ranks, it's very low ranking. It's like the first rank above private. But then he defected and was promoted to captain within the Philippine Revolutionary Army. One of the vignettes in the book says that supposedly he was killed, and then someone claimed a bounty on his head, but historically we're not able to actually confirm whether or not that was him. So there's a good chance that he survived. Who knows? His what happened to him at the end was a mystery to everyone, but it's really important to see that there were already people, you know, condemning the imperialist violence at home, and then soldiers themselves taking up arms against the U.S. military to help out the Filipinos.
I think that's incredible. Do y'all? You know, to go and fight, you know, to desert the imperialist army and take up a struggle alongside a less equipped, you know what I'm saying, guerrilla struggle to take on, you know, the people who've been oppressing you, you know, for centuries. I think that's truly amazing.
So maybe I'll just use that. Thanks. So, you know, the U.S. then acquired the Philippines, right, through force of arms. And this really started their, like, remolding of the country to be a source of, you know, natural resources, cheap labor. And in order to subjugate the people of the Philippines, they enacted, like, a campaign of propaganda and miseducation among the people to make them docile, right? On the left-hand side, this is a political cartoon from a magazine. And if you can see it, that's President McKinley, and he's supposed to be holding what is a Filipino child, right? And if you go down to the bottom, the water says civilization, right? And he's saying, "Oh, you dirty boy," which is also like, ew. But really this idea that the U.S. was coming in and through their own, like, quote unquote superior education and culture, remolding the Philippines and Filipinos. Cuba and Puerto Rico in the back as well. And we can even see that can you go to the political cartoon on the bottom? So here is a political cartoon of Uncle Sam, you know, educating these children in the front, and you can see, you know, they're wearing sashes that say Cuba, Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico. So this is really like how these imperialists saw these people of these newly acquired nations as, like, you know, quote unquote savages that need to be educated and civilized. And concretely, here at the top, we have an image of a classroom in the Philippines from the time. So if you can see, these are several Filipino young girls, and in the back is a white lady who is their teacher, right? So the U.S. sent about 600 teachers to the Philippines. We call them Thomasites because they came aboard the USS Thomas. And this was the start of this education system that was really molded in the American mold, and to make people docile and to really see the U.S. as a savior, right, as a positive force for Filipinos. Actually, if we can go to the next slide.
Wait, before you do that, I just wanted, if you go back to this political cartoon at the bottom, it's not just about, educating these savages, but in the back is a black man cleaning the window, an indigenous person reading a book upside down, and then a Chinese child not even allowed in there. So they really ran the gamut and got bingo with oppression there.
Yeah. So to kind of bring it full circle and is it me? Am I messing up with the microphone? It might be me. Yeah. So Carter G. Woodson, who we kind of credit as the father of Black history, and who we can really thank for having Black History Month. Folks might not know that he actually lived in the Philippines for 3 years, from 1903 to 1907. He was a school administrator there. We don't have any direct quotes from him about how he felt about that experience, but we can't help but speculate how that really changed his worldview and maybe inspired him to write about the history of his own people, and write the Afrocentric history that he wrote. So Carter G. Woodson also inspired Renato Constantino, who was a Filipino educator, who, inspired by his book, then wrote The Miseducation of the Filipino, which was published in 1982. And really, the quotes are highlighting this idea that, revolutionary fervor, the aspiration to be free, to be liberated, will always live on unless it's educated out of people and brainwashed out of people, right? So you all are here today, during our teach-in to learn more. And, we should be inspired by these quotes because it's not just pessimistic, they have a big propaganda machine that's well-funded, a public education system that serves the empire. It's also within people's power to become educated about their own history and learn about not just historical facts, but the revolutionary history of their peoples.
Yeah, I mean, so just keeping it going, parallels in terms of what the United States did to Filipinos, and what the United States did to Black people here. These are human zoos. These are images from human zoos. I forget what the caption said. It was really crazy. On this one, it said something like, I don't know, slaves or whoever carrying.
Human cannibals.
Yeah, human cannibals carrying their master.
Yeah, cannibals carrying their master.
And so you have Black folks. I think this was in Chicago. This is during either the World Fair or sometime around that point. But you can see white folks here on top of that, whatever thing that they're carrying. And then, of course, white folks having a good time watching a parade or whatever. But, they would bring in Black folks from within the United States, but even outside the United States to, participate in these zoos. The World Fair in Chicago was a big one where they brought folks from all over, the planet really to be shown off, as in these zoos, as these kind of old missing, oftentimes called the missing link, between civilization and monkeys, here is another one. It's another example of Filipinos in another human zoo. I think it was in New York or something like that.
Yeah, so human zoos took place all over the world, not just at the World's Fair in Chicago, but there was also human zoos at the literal Bronx Zoo in New York. And going back to the education aspect, some of I think it was at the Chicago's World Fair, they had a fake classroom set up with Filipino children being taught by a white lady to show the benevolence of the United States to go and educate the people that they thought were savages.
Right. And here you have a little Filipino girl who is literally tied to this post, and there's folks here around her just kind of watching her. This was Filipino baby, Coney Island. Look at this guy just sitting there watching, and then you have here this young brother named Ota Benga. You may have heard of. He was a Congolese young brother who was brought to the United States to participate in the human zoo. In some places in the Congo, they filed their teeth, and so they thought that was a, whatever, exotic marvel, whatever. So they brought him in, and he ended up he was brought in, I think, 1906. He ended up being released from the zoo and just kind of left wherever to fend for himself, and he ended up killing himself. This is why he's a well-known case. Is he ended up committing suicide 6 years later, from basically just isolation in the United States, and of course racial, and oppression, in this racist society. Now, here we go into lynchings, keeping these parallels going. Just to really hammer home the point that it was the same, people, the same policies, the same government, that was perpetrating, vicious Jim Crow terror on black people throughout the South, that was expanding, across the ocean over to the Philippines. And so, you have here on the left this image of three Moros in the Philippines, in Jolo, Mindanao, you said? Yeah. In 1911, who were hung in this scaffold right here, and you can see the soldiers behind them, using the same techniques that here in 1911, same year, this mother, Laura Nelson, and her son were lynched in Oklahoma. And then of course, as usual, there's the crowd has gathered to watch, because for them it was it was a good time, and so they were. Essentially, the images say it all.
Yeah, now we're going to the hopeful part. So these are a bunch of examples of solidarity between between Black folks and Filipino folks. I also want to make sure that we name that there are Black Filipinos, both indigenous Black Filipinos from the Philippines and mixed race Filipinos, including the children of this lovely woman, Cecilia Suyat Marshall. She was a civil rights activist and a historian. She used to work at the NAACP and ended up marrying Thurgood Marshall. Ever heard of him? The first African-American Supreme Court justice. And when we go back to it, it is a video of her just talking about the work that she did at the NAACP.
Do we have? I see there's says no audio on the projector. I got audio coming from the laptop, but if it doesn't work, we can. I think just put the mic to the laptop. Let's see what happens. Check my audio. See.
I was actually over at the Library of Congress looking at some of the NAACP papers this past week and reading about some of the annual conventions. What were some of the main issues that you remember typing comments on or working on?
Well, I was there for the cases of the Groveland boys, the 4 boys that were indicted because they so-called raped a white woman, all 4 boys. And I remember Emmett Till case in Chicago. And I don't know, so many other cases that we were involved with because the branches were responsible for taking care of the cases, but they got advice from our office, from the lawyers and from my boss, who was head of all the branches in the country. So I got to interact with a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think watching the whole video, this was an oral history that Cecilia Suyat Marshall did with the Library of Congress. And in her work in the NAACP, I just think folks here would really appreciate this. A lot of what she did was note-taking and minutes-taking. And anyone here who's ever done a group project or been a political organizer knows you really have to celebrate the note-taker, who's one of the most thankless jobs that you can do when you're working with other people. But that's how she got started when she moved from Hawaii to New York City and started working for the NAACP. So. Yeah, so bringing it together, we wanted to talk about solidarity between now Black folks, Filipinos, and Chicanos that were expressed during labor struggles in the 20th century. So some of these people here, we'll start with this image here on the right-hand side. So these were three of the other one on the other side, yeah. Three of the main, labor leaders during the Delano grape workers strike. Folks don't know, like, a lot of grapes are harvested in California, and a lot of the labor at the time was being done by Filipinos and Chicanos, and they had been formed into separate unions at the time. So when Filipinos would go on strike, the Mexican workers would scab. When the Mexicans went on strike, the Filipinos would scab. So the Delano grape workers strike in the mid-20th century was really one of the first times that they came together and said, let's strike together. And that's what became the foundation for the United Farm Workers. So pictured here, going from left to right, is Larry Itliong, who's one of the most important Filipino labor leaders in this country. And then that's Dolores Huerta. I think a lot of people, they focus a lot on the men on the sides. So Larry Itliong and Cesar Chavez of the UFW. And just wanted to shout out because people, we forget important women in history like this. Dolores Huerta was one of the leaders of this movement. And while, Larry and Cesar were organizing the on-the-ground strikes in California, she had the very important job of being sent to the East Coast to organize the consumer boycott, right? Because without the successful consumer boycott, coupled together with the labor strike, this is what actually won their demands for better pay and better working conditions in California. So you could zoom out. Here, on the left-hand side, was a pamphlet that was created. It was written by both Cesar Chavez and Bayard Rustin together to really hammer home why labor rights are important to all minorities. And here is a quote. It's at the bottom, so I can read it out. It says here, "We in the civil rights movement have been traditionally opposed to right-to-work laws." So for folks who are not aware of what right-to-work means, those are laws that make it so that you can work in a workplace and elect to not be organized in a union, right? Because whatever you want to, they tell you you'll save union dues, but really it's a scam to, kneecap the labor struggle. We have stood against these laws on the grounds that not only that they destroy the unity and impair the effectiveness of labor unions, but also that they constitute an obstacle to the progress of Americans belonging to racial, religious, and national minorities. So that's a quote from the pamphlet. It's available freely online. And some of the signatories to the pamphlet and the intro are A. Philip Randolph. Folks don't know him, one of the lead organizers of the Porters Union strikes, one of the first black unions in the United States who were working as train porters in the early 1920s. And him, together with MLK, signed this document to publish, right? Because I think in the sanitized version that we're taught about in public schools about MLK, they don't always talk about his staunch labor activism, right?
Number one. You want to do it first?
Yeah.
You want to explain the video before you?
So in addition to labor strikes, there were also student strikes in 1969 at the University of California, Berkeley. Never heard of it. They also did a strike in 1999. The original strike was to get the Third World College and Ethnic Studies at the University of California, and then 1999 was another strike in order to keep the Ethnic Studies. But this is another example of not just Black and Asian activists, but also Chicano people as well.
1, that funds be allocated for the implementation of the Third World College. A, Department of Asian Studies, controlled by Asian people. B, Department of Black Studies, as proposed by the AASU. C, Department of Chicano Studies. D, any other ethnic studies programs as they are developed and presented.
That's hard. I love that.
Yeah, and so as a result of the strike at UC Berkeley, they started with one of, or the first, Filipino American Studies centers. This next protest is actually 9 years of solidarity. Filipinos famously, a lot of them are in the Bay Area. This took place in San Francisco at the International Hotel, also known as the I Hotel. It was home to a lot of mostly elderly, mostly Filipino and Chinese Americans, and a Chinese Thai company bought the building and decided to evict all of the residents. So activists from all walks of life in San Francisco, including Black activists, as you can see here. This was at City Hall to protest the evictions. Eventually, the California Supreme Court pushed the evictions through. And so this next photo is the protest that was happening. This is April 1977. 3,000 activists gathered at the I Hotel, at the International Hotel, around 3 a.m. Before the eviction started. They formed a human barricade around the entrance, and they stood against 400 policemen in riot gear. 100 of the tenants and allies were barricaded in the hotel to resist eviction. They were not successful because police brutality is terrible. They ran horses into the crowd, violently arrested folks. But it's a nice show of the people coming together to literally put their bodies on the line to keep people in their homes. Bringing it 40 years into the future, this is a Black Lives Matter rally in San Francisco where they actually walked in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd. This particular march, they marched to the International Hotel, once again as a symbol of knowing history, respecting history, and the long struggle.
Yeah, I mean, and just to add to that, as we said, we've been fighting very hard, over the last 6 months. Most of the people here, we know from the streets, and we know that we're building a movement. And it's not just us here in the DMV, up and down the East Coast, from Baltimore. We have folks down here from Baltimore. Shout out to y'all. You know what I mean? All the way up to New York and beyond. There's Black people, Filipinos, Chicanos, Latinos, everybody coming together to fight back, from the East Coast to the Midwest to the West Coast. Like you said, there's a lot of struggle going on, and a lot of struggle in solidarity against our, united enemy in the U.S. imperialism. And I think that, it's only growing, it's only getting stronger. And I think you can see, that there's no, like we say, the chain of history, there's no slack in it. You know what I mean? It's one straight, motion from back then to where we are now. And we're literally pushing forward the same struggles, that our ancestors were involved in. And we're doing it together, which is the only way that we can, possibly win. I wanted to just add on the question of, Black self-determination. We spoke about the Black Belt South and, Reconstruction. And I just want to say that here, with us, with the DC Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression, our primary demand is for community control of the police. And that's a demand. That's not one that we created out of nowhere. It didn't just kind of fall out the sky. It's one that has, Black people have been fighting for from the very beginning. One of the demands outside of public education and, suffrage and everything else that Black people were fighting for in Reconstruction, it was, community control. And in particular, particular, they had, black sheriffs, black police, not to just be police, but to be used against the KKK, to be used against the white racist, terror that they were experiencing in the South. And that's exactly what they deployed them for, and as we said, that terror was only held back, through that, armed resistance, and potential armed resistance, that black people were willing to wage. And so, that struggle carries through, all the way up into, for example, in Chicago, where the struggle for community control is most advanced, the Black Panther Party was the first, that was the first moment when under Fred Hampton that community control was formalized into a ballot struggle. And in 2021, through the Chicago chapter of the National Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression, that struggle was won using the jet fuel, of the George Floyd rebellion. It was able to be passed through, city council. They created these bodies where now Chicago has, it's the most advanced police oversight body in the country. They have power. They have a policy over CPD policy, and now they're waging a struggle to imbue those bodies with power over police contracts, police budget, the ability to hire and fire the chief of police. And these are, in directly elected bodies, of civilians, not police, and not politicians. And that's what we want here in Washington, D.C. They've shown us, through these ICE attacks, these, terrorists, rampaging through our communities, black, brown, and everybody else, that we need community control of the police now more than ever to stop MPD from collaborating with them, and to have the power to hold them accountable for the things that they do in our communities. And that all traces back to, our struggle for self-determination over the, the institutions and our own political destiny. Right on?
Yeah, similarly, going back to the national democratic struggle and the struggle for self-determination in the Philippines, I mean, a huge part of that is freedom from U.S. imperialism. As you saw, they came in the 1890s and they literally haven't left. And this is forcing people out of their homes. It's literally plundering the land, taking the resources, and, forcing folks to migrate overseas to, find better life. And then they come to the U.S., who are the people that force them out of their home, but they're not allowed here. So Filipinos are being detained. And so with self-determination, it's not just about, freedom from the land, but also the freedom to be able to live in your homeland, return to your homeland, and not be facing militarization there as well.
All right. So here we have questions from the audience. That is the end of our presentation, if y'all want. And we didn't do too bad on time. Sorry we got started so late, but we seem to be, it's 8:03. If folks want to spend a couple minutes asking questions, and then we'll close it out. And we could pass the mic too, if there's. Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
One here.
I don't know if you all could talk a bit more about that history of black solidarity during the Philippine-American War, because, it's interesting, the story of a black Buffalo soldier who joins the side of the Philippine Revolution. So I don't know if you all could talk a bit more about that or give more details, because that was really interesting.
Yeah, so there were, as Rob said, 20 or so Buffalo soldiers that defected from the U.S. military. As the war went on, though, there were additional black soldiers who didn't defect, but they just straight up refused to fight against the Filipino people. They realized that they have more in common with the Filipinos that they were being forced to attack than they did with the people who were forcing them to do the attacking. And part of the interesting nature of the black soldiers who were defecting was that they integrated with the armed Filipino resistance in the Philippines at the time, used guerrilla warfare tactics, and really made trouble for U.S. forces.
I think to tie it into, forgot if I mentioned this, not related directly to the Buffalo Soldiers defecting, but sort of the common cause that a lot of black people who went to the Philippines, both them and the teachers that were sent over, like we said earlier, a lot of Filipino children said that they preferred having black teachers over white teachers when they came over, right? They much preferred the teaching style and the respect that they were given during that time. And, there were some testimonies from different Buffalo Soldiers who felt conflicted over their stay in the war, even the ones who didn't defect or didn't refuse orders, because they realized that, they had more in common with these people who they were waging war against than they do against the people who were mistreating them, who were their direct officers. Like I mentioned, the Buffalo Soldiers were not allowed to be the officers of their own units. Yeah.
Right on. And we can go to the next question. And while we do that, I just want to show this image that I was telling you about earlier, the Black Belt South. You can kind of, I lied. Where is that? Maybe it's not meant to be. Oh, I'll try to get on the laptop, but go ahead.
You spoke about there being black people in the Philippines. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yes, give me 1 second. There's a good picture in the book that I can pull up. If I can find it. Oh yeah, here it is. Colorism is a huge problem within the Filipino community, and it is based out of the imperialist struggle. It's hard to see. I can pass it around. Basically, it's a hand with varying levels of darkness. The Spaniards were up top because they are from Europe and they're white. And then you get into mestizos or mixed Filipino and Spanish, as well as their words indios and negritos. So there are darker indigenous Filipinos who, by all intents and purposes of racialization, are black based on their skin tone. So yeah, just pass it around if folks want to see. No?
Hi, I'm Gordon. When I was in the Philippines, I spent time with the Aita community, which is you're referring to, but they are some of the first inhabitants of the Philippine Islands, and today also have a lot of resistance to foreign mining. So the community I spent with is actually a great success story, an ecotourism project, was trying to take their land from them and turn it over for, white tourists from Europe and the U.S. But the community came together and shut it down. And so they took us to go see this haunted house, basically, of some, luxury resort, and it's falling apart. And then there's a big banner announcing the this new ecotourism project, but they had all signed it, showing that they had defeated it. And so this community still continued. We only stayed for a day rather than a few days because of the militarization from the armed forces of the Philippines. We weren't able to stay the night because of the danger of the Philippine military there, but it stayed with me, ever since I went in 2022. It's really inspiring the Aita struggle of indigenous peoples in the Philippines.
Any other questions?
Got to.
There we go. Real quick, this is what I was talking about. So you see these contiguous counties from eastern Texas all the way up to Virginia. And this is a map from a while ago. Here's a more recent one from 1990, the kind of census data. And you see the darkest ones are where there's 50% or more black people percentage of the population. And you see it's just concentrated right there. Basically to this day. Mostly because, the possibility of actual integration was foreclosed upon, at the point that Reconstruction was drowned in blood. Reconstruction presented the possibility of actual democratic equality, actual possibilities for integration, in an equal society. But of course, under, capitalism, which is essentially based on, oppressing these kinds of nations, black people were locked into this national kind of status, and even white people who live here in this region suffer. Look at it, it's the most depressed region in the United States when it comes to the economy, schooling, housing, any metric, for a society. It's depressed right there because it's an oppressed nation, and white people who live in that same area experience that same, the poor schools, poor this, not everything, it's not the same levels, but just by proximity, they are subjected to, this kind of national oppression. In the same way a white person living in, again, Nigeria would have, they would have a lot, they will have a lot, in their own little compound, but a country with, let's say, depressed municipal resources or this or that or that, you know what I'm trying to say. All right, next question.
Thanks for the presentation. I think one of the things that really strikes me is the history of the anti-imperialist perspective for both of the struggles of Black people and Filipinos. And my question is, what do you think it will take, or what can we do to kind of re-enliven that anti-imperialist movement, especially amongst Filipinos who may see the U.S. as a positive force in the Philippines, or for Black people as well?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to, to enliven this revolutionary fervor. We're doing one part of it, this education and teaching people to, be proud of their revolutionary and anti-imperialist history. But what's really key in this moment, we see that, the world economies, the economies of imperialist countries like the United States and, downstream effects on colonized peoples like the Philippines, it's truly in decline. I don't think that we can ignore that fact, right? That the imperialist world order is falling apart and eating itself alive, right? And as conditions worsen, people are upset. People are mad, right? And the Philippines last year experienced, in the midst of all these corruption scandals that happened, the largest protests in decades, right? So the question to people who are political organizers or politically minded, I think, is how do we seize upon this moment, right? And don't let it pass us by, right? I think for domestically in the U.S., it's been said before, Trump's kind of saying the quiet part out loud for a lot of people, right? The U.S. government has been oppressing people this entire time, but as conditions worsen domestically, we really need to seize upon this moment where everyone is so upset and, not wait until they're pacified by crumbs from whoever comes after Trump, and really organize them into a political force, right? Because when people understand that they can come together, become organized, we wage different political struggles. We have broad campaigns that have really long-term goals, but we also have campaigns that fight for immediate goals as well. And we need to demonstrate to people who join organizations or just working alongside us that when we fight for immediate wins, like where I was talking about community controlled police in, say, Chicago, right? You have to show people that that's how they win things, right? It's not by waiting for some perfect politician who's running for office to come along and then I can cast my vote for that person, right? Because that's a great example of how mass movements win political fights. And that's a great example of how you can show people that, being in organizations and, waging political struggle is worth your time, right? Because it's the future that we're fighting for, right? Our own futures, the futures of our children, grandchildren, right? That's what we're fighting for.
Yeah, and I think that the field of struggle is so good at washing away these backwards ideas. You know what I mean? If you think about even Palestine, before the flood, before Al-Aqsa flood, there were a lot of backwards ideas that were just kind of so prominent, and very few people wanted to speak out, for Palestine. And then they got swept up in a tsunami of a movement, that washed away, oh, we shouldn't speak out, against, what the Israelis are doing because we might be labeled anti-Semitists, or anti-Semitic, sorry, or we shouldn't be, the international struggle is not our struggle, or, black people have a lot of backwards ideas around Arabs and vice versa. There's a lot of backwards ideas about black people in the Arab community or in Arab communities, but in the course of, this global campaign, that everybody was getting pulled into, those ideas were corrected by the fact that black people were seeing, Palestinians showing up for them, and Palestinians were seeing black people show up for them, and the same thing goes for, Filipino struggles and black struggles as well. I think it's really a matter of integrating us as organizers, integrating, our campaigns as much as possible, taking them up, as our own. And I think, it's that, kind of like day in, day out, people seeing Filipinos showing up for black people and vice versa, that really does kind of like do more work than any kind of, reactionary ideology ever could. You know what I mean? There's a quote from, in the Black Belt South, there was a chapter of the Communist Party. It was the biggest chapter in the South, and it was completely black led, black populated. Had hundreds of folks, in Alabama, and they had mass organizations, with thousands and thousands of members. They had a sharecroppers union in the middle of the most vicious, Jim Crow region of America that you can imagine, where organizing is suicide, certainly as a communist. But they had a sharecroppers union. They were organizing sharecroppers. They had 15,000 members at one point. They were that large. And they were not just organizing. If we go to the first photo from this, they weren't just organizing. This is a photo actually of that sharecroppers union. And you see there are white people in this photo. This is not, slave master. This is poor white people who were swept into the struggle because they were shown that in order to, alleviate their horrific conditions, they're in the South as, exploited workers, that they had to fight alongside black sharecroppers as well. And there's there's this well documented in a book called Hammer and Hoe. There's a racist white man who still had racist ideas, but was articulating, what we're getting at. He said, basically, we gotta organize with these niggas. You know what I'm saying? So like, even in his like racist kind of like, thing, he still understood that like we have to work together with these people who have been taught to hate. You know what I mean? That's the only way around it. And of course, we're not gonna take that shit nowadays, but it gets to the point that like, these racist ideas don't stand a chance next to, consistent and concrete like practice of solidarity.
And I just wanted to real quick touch on, this like idealization of the U.S. by a lot of Filipinos and Filipino Americans. History is really important. We are not always taught, especially Filipino history, Filipino American history. I'm a second generation Filipino American, so my grandparents immigrated. But my dad, for example, learned literally 2 years ago that 1 million Filipinos died as a result of the Philippine-American War. Both the U.S. and the Philippine government are really good at propaganda and spreading lies about activist communities and what the struggles actually are. And so I think not just sitting and learning, but taking this history, taking these things that you've learned today and throughout the struggle and bringing them to the masses of like, okay, you think this, that's actually not true. This is what happened. And yeah, I think that's an important part as well.
All right. I think that's a good place to wrap it up at. Did you have the mic?
We did have one.
Oh, go ahead.
Is that cool?
Let's end on that one.
Thanks.
Oh no, that was a good. Go ahead,
No,
Mom.
you got it.
Get the translator. Like, my name is Kendra. Hi, I'm visiting from Atlanta. I'm from Clarksville, Mississippi, actually.
Come on.
But every time I talk here, someone asks me where I'm from. So I just wanted to go ahead and say that before I started talking. Um, so, and I'm also a member of the Atlanta Alliance, by the way. So happy to be here tonight.
Go!
Yes.
And shout out to is it Bayan or Bayan? How do I say it? Bayan. I got to go to a conference this year, and your graphics are so good that I wanted to buy everything.
Yes, come on.
So I'm very happy that you all had this tonight so that I can come out. I'm in DC, for a little bit, so I'm happy to kind of be here and kind of bring all this full circle for myself. I was saying that there was a leeway into my question, because my question was actually about the author, and about asking like who she is, like what's her motivation for actually writing the book. But for me, the title of the book drew a parallel to another book, because the title is Black Lives and Brown Freedom, Untold Histories of War, Solidarity, and Genocide. And it actually like drew a parallel for me to We Will Shoot Back, Armed Resistance in the Mississippi Freedom Movement by Akinela Omowale Umoja, who wrote about, the history of armed resistance that actually is nonfiction, it's real. He took the time to actually study and write for a number of years about that portion, because we're taught that the civil rights movement was essentially a nonviolent movement in the United States, and that's just not true.
Right.
And self-defense, armed self-defense, was crucial to the efficacy of the civil rights movement in our communities.
That's right.
Pretty much in the South. And so I guess my question was like, who is the author, and what's her motivation for writing the book, and just that I think a vital piece of self-determination is telling your own history and being able to speak for ourselves and tell our own stories. So just not leaving out that portion of like what self-determination is and how important it is for her to write this book, and just wanted to shout out and just ask more about her.
Right on. Thank you for that question.
So Gabriel Rollo, who is a man, was a writer and popular historian, has a pretty big following on YouTube and social media, and he makes a lot of posts illuminating the history of the Philippines for a mass audience. So that's kind of the target audience of the book. I think it serves a really good primer for either Filipinos living in the Philippines who don't know a lot of history about the Black struggle in the United States, and then also an introduction to people living in the United States who don't know much about the history of the Philippines. So I think it's what I like about the book. It's very written in plain writing, very accessible to people. Because I think it was really to illuminate the history and also the shared enemies of both struggles, right? And I think that gets illuminated here. I like what you raised about the book that you were talking about, because after the questions section, we're gonna show a quick movie trailer for a movie screening that we're gonna be showing this weekend, that talks a little bit about what is happening currently for the national liberation struggle in the Philippines. So hopefully that's exciting for folks to see. It's pretty, yeah. So sorry, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna do a quick overview about campaigns that our organizations are taking up to really invite people to get involved. I mean, we got a lot of people's contact info, but the big thing that we want people to take away from this is how necessary it is for us to be organized in order to wage these political fights. So do you want to talk about the Defend Mindoro?
Sure. I already kind of touched on this, but the Philippine government is really good at propaganda against activists, especially young activists, youth, and students in the movement. And now there's a little bit of a sharper eye on overseas Filipinos as well. On January 1st of this year, New Year's Day, there was a attack by the armed forces of the Philippines, who are funded and backed by the United States. They bombed an indigenous community on the island of Mindoro. Mindoro is an island, one of the 10,000 in the Philippines. It's very rich in oil. The name comes from mine of gold. And one of the Filipino Americans in the DMV, actually, Chantal Enacoche, was taken captive by the armed forces of the Philippines. She has been released, thankfully, but there is still a lot to be done on the island of Mindoro. I mean, hundreds of people were displaced. Children were killed. They are blocking humanitarian assistance from getting into these communities and taking people's homes away. And there is this increased attack on activists, especially, like I said, youth activists, being accused of being groomed by terrorists, which is the term that they use for the people who are taking up the struggle in the Philippines. So that is one of our huge campaigns right now, which will lead into the trailer. And then, as always, we are defending migrants, not just Filipino migrants, but all the people under attack from ICE in our communities.
Yeah, thank you. So, like I said, I'm a member of the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, which is, a solidarity formation made up of, some Filipinos, but a lot of majority non-Filipinos, right? People who see the justness of what's happening in the Philippines and agree that as people who live in this country, right, if you want to call yourself a citizen, a taxpayer, we have power to influence the United States support for the Philippine military. So, our main campaign is ending that pipeline of U.S. military support to the Philippines, right? Because without, the arms, money flowing to the armed forces of the Philippines, the Filipino government cannot wage this brutal counterinsurgency in the countryside. This campaign involves, different forms of political advocacy, whether it be legislative advocacy, movement building, taking to the streets and protesting, because this is one of our aims that we think is, it's achievable. We can do this. We can isolate the government of the Philippines from its backer, the United States. And I think it's a worthwhile fight in order to, improve the lives of Filipinos who are under the gun of the armed forces of the Philippines.
Right on. I'll just make it quick. They've shown us we're here in a city where MPD is assisting HSI in all the things that they're doing, and up into including shooting at people like Philip Brown and Justin Nelson. In the case of Philip Brown, the police covered up the shooting on behalf of the federal agents at a DC resident, and the politicians are doing nothing about it. In fact, the U.S. Attorney's Office said that they will not prosecute the agents who fired because nobody was hit. We know that's absolute bullshit. Shooting at somebody even without hitting them is still assault. No one would be allowed to get away with that. But like politicians all over the country, they're showing us that they will not lift a finger to defend DC residents against these attacks. And they're also showing us that we need community control of the police now more than ever. We want to take that power over policing into our own hands in order to hold these police accountable for the things that they do and don't do, in our communities. And so we're kicking off. We are developing we're in the early stage of this campaign. We will be having a retreat next weekend where we will be, setting down the pathway for this campaign. We will be doing research around the particular conditions here in D.C. So that we can, like Chicago, take the power over the police away from the mayor and put it into the hands of the people. And so, if you want to get involved with the D.C. Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, let us know. We got a lot of members in here. We have some sign-up sheets, and we meet every Monday at 6 p.m.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted, sorry, I forgot to mention, with the Defend Mindoro campaign, Bayan DMV, Bayan USA are calling for the U.S. to push for an independent investigation about what happened on January 1st. If you are interested in contacting your legislator to tell them to do so, if they're going to send money to the Philippines, they better be holding the Philippines accountable for their war crimes. Find me because the link is, I think it'll be easier if I just tell you. So feel free to find me and I can give you the advocacy toolkit to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. So some things to look forward to for everyone here. We'll show the trailer in a little bit, but this Sunday at 4:30 p.m. At the Black Workers and Wellness Center, 2500 MLK Southeast, we're going to be screening a film called Revolution Selfie. So an American-based director, Stephen DeCastro, went to the Philippines and visited a guerrilla front of soldiers from the New People's Army who are waging armed struggle against the Philippine government. So he integrated with them and filmed their daily lives and what their lives were like. It's a really moving documentary because it really humanizes the people who are in this struggle. And I encourage people to come out and watch it. And then, next Wednesday at 5 p.m., we will be, holding a mobilization at the Pershing Memorial and marching on the mayor's office and the White House to really uplift these struggles and, make our demands heard, right, for community control of the police, ending the pipeline of weapons to the Philippines. So we'll see you there. If you follow our socials, we'll have more details, but also for folks who signed in, we'll be able to share details about those, when it gets closer. So thank you. So before we close, though, I want to show the film trailer if we're able to. Oh, nice. We got the speaker set up.
Your mission is to infiltrate the New People's Army. The United States has designated the New People's Army a foreign terrorist organization. They have been waging a revolutionary war which has cost 40,000 lives.
The only caveat is that whatever you make should not add to the confusion.
So you don't know when you will die.
This is a reality show, not in the TV, but in the real life.
Yeah, this is no TV. This is no movie, man.
Oh, yes.
But perhaps it's time to find out what my government has been hiding.
What is the use of our lives if we were going to die without a purpose?
It really is an incredible film. I was just goosebumps thinking about it. I've seen it once, and he's around. He's done events, in the DMV in Maryland. We saw it at the University of Maryland not too long ago. So definitely pull up. Thank you all for coming. This has been another teaching, by organizations here in DC. Shout out to Sankofa. Thank you for having us here. If you see any books that you like, go ahead and buy them. Support a black business that's fighting to stay open during gentrification upsurge. And Post-its. There you go. Amazing. And here's the book. I think there are some copies at the back if you want to purchase that. And we can close out with a chant. When black people are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back.
When Filipinos are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back.
That's right. That's right. All right, folks. Get home safe.